Jared Kushner, and plans for a back channel to Moscow. Getting some new facts in this case. Welcome to a brand new hour of America's Newsroom. I'm Shannon Breen.
How was the weekend?
It was quick. Even with the extra day. I don't know how that happens. How about you?
Morning to you, Shannon. It was great.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good morning, everybody. A source telling Fox News it was the Russians who brought up the idea, not Jared Kushner, during a meeting with Russia's ambassador at Trump Tower during the transition. Kellyanne Conway earlier today slamming other media outlets for their reporting on this. This is what she said.
Many news reports very recently that had the facts wrong. If you go back to a couple of weeks ago, you'll notice that one paper in particular, 3 times in a row, relied upon information that was immediately batted down as false. And this entire thing is just a rush to judgment.
So let's try and sort it out with Rich Edson, live at the State Department. Rich, good morning to you.
Good morning, Bill. And this was a meeting in December at Trump Tower to discuss Syria strategy. That's according to a source familiar with the matter, reported by our Catherine Herridge. That source also denies that Jared Kushner and Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak discussed a permanent back channel between Trump's transition team and Moscow. The Washington Post reciting U.S. officials detailing intercepts of Russian communications reports that Kislyak relayed to his superiors in Moscow that Kushner proposed using secure Russian diplomatic facilities in the U.S. so the Trump transition could speak with Moscow. The Post points out in its reporting that Russia often mixes false information in its communications with the Kremlin to confuse and create chaos. Kushner is a senior advisor to his father-in-law, the President of the United States. And as for Syria discussions, the Trump administration has been speaking with Russian officials to try to figure out a way forward in Syria while the Russian government continues to remain allied to Bashar al-Assad, the regime there, Bill.
And what is the focus now on Kushner from investigators, Rich? What have you found out?
Well, there is now an investigation focus on Kushner and a meeting with a Russian banker. This is Sergei Gorkov. He is close to Russian President Vladimir Putin, runs a financial institution that's currently under sanction by the U.S. government. This is according to the New York Times. The paper also says the White House confirmed these meetings, claiming that Kushner met with a range of different foreign officials on a range of different topics in the transition. The president, by the way, has just commented on all of this, tweeting out this morning, quote, Russian officials must be laughing at the U.S. and how a lame excuse for why the Dems lost the election has taken over the fake news. Yet the investigations at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and in congressional committees continues. Bill.
Thank you, Rich. Rich Edson, live there at the State Department. Shannon.
All right, so the White House saying there's nothing new about Kushner reaching out to Russia. Do they have a point? After all, President Obama, who did not get along with President Putin, reportedly tapped Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, to try to help go through back channels and help mend fences. Bloomberg News reporting in 2014, in a separate attempt at outreach, the White House turned to an old friend of Putin's for help. The White House called on former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to discuss having him call Putin directly, according to 2 officials. It's unclear whether Kissinger actually made the call. Byron York's chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner and a Fox News contributor. Good morning to you, Byron. That's one example there, but we know that with any number of things, a lot of times this is how Washington tries to get things done.
Well, it does. And, this news story fits into a pattern of leak-based stories that we've seen. They have enough details to be sensational, but they don't have enough details for us to understand what actually happened. And we really don't quite understand what happened here. And even if it is as portrayed, what would be wrong with that? And you're right, we have seen a number of reports that show that previous presidents, not just Barack Obama, but many others, have established back channels during the course of their presidency. Now, this was during a transition. Trump was not the president. Jared Kushner was not yet a White House official. But on the other hand, this was an incoming administration, and incoming administrations do talk with foreign powers.
All right, I'm going to read a little bit from the New York Times this morning saying this. The Trump transition was unique in its unwillingness to use the government's communications lines and briefing material for its dealings with many foreign governments, partly because of concern that Obama administration officials might be monitoring the calls. So there was that concern. In addition, you mentioned leaks. And for the Washington Post to have this information about alleged intercepts of Russian communications, somebody had to leak that once again to the Washington Post.
Well, these are highly classified things, and you're absolutely right. It is a crime to leak those sorts of things. But on the other hand, in Washington, there's a lot of ways it can happen. The original agency might have gotten it to a law enforcement agency, who might have gotten it to someone in, say, the Senate, and from there it gets into the press. So there are a lot of people possibly involved in a possible leak. But clearly, I think we can say that Trump transition officials' suspicion that the Obama administration might be keeping a very close eye on them and inclined to leak, if possible, to damage their plans, that wasn't a crazy idea.
Well, speaking of senators, there are some on the left who are upset about what they heard on the Sunday shows from various administration officials, also from Senator Corker, Republican out of Tennessee, who has praised the president's foreign trip. He also said this repeatedly, that Jared has said he is willing to come and answer any and all questions as the Senate continues to investigate what's gone on with Russia and meddling in the election last year and potential collusion, which everybody says they have not yet seen any evidence of a direct link there. But as that continues, his attorney says, listen, he's always said he would come speak. Corker says it's turned into hyperbole. Let's have him come talk to us before this blows up into something that may be a nothing burger.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of these cases where, look, if the person involved is volunteering to come speak to you, take him up on it. And I don't know if Kushner wants to speak publicly or privately, but it would be with lawmakers, Republican and Democrats, on Capitol Hill, and they would get a much better sense of what actually happened, which just goes back to what I was saying at the top of this. We have enough details for it to be a sensational story, but not enough for us to know what actually happened.
Well, this voluntary stepping forward by Kushner multiple times through multiple channels to say that he wants to talk about it. Why doesn't that take a little bit of the wind out of the sails of this story? It's as if he didn't even offer. I mean, it's as if he's judged guilty of something that you said, like you said, even if it proves to be true, the story we're getting is that the Russians proposed this. It was going to be a one-time phone call. It was to talk about Syria. It seems like there's a lot that we just still don't know.
Well, the reason is that the story is not appearing just by itself in isolation. It fits into a whole bunch of stories we've seen about contacts and alleged contacts between the Trump campaign, the Trump transition, and Russian officials. So it fits into this much larger scheme that the Senate Intelligence Committee is investigating, and now a special counsel in the Justice Department is investigating. So perhaps it wouldn't be that big a deal in isolation, but the deal is it's part of a much bigger stream of stories.
Mm-hmm. And those numerous investigations on numerous tracks continue, and we'll watch them all. Byron York, thank you very much. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you, Shannon.
Things were hot and heated with lawmakers on the Texas State House floor in Austin. Cameras caught this scuffle unfolding. Tempers flaring. One said he called the ICE agents on protesters rallying right outside the chamber.
He walked back and told us, I called ICE. And we both, what? What do you mean? You did what? He said, yeah, I called ICE. And then he said, F them.
You say things to incite people, okay? And that's exactly what I did.
So here is the buzz. People were protesting over the recent sanctuary city ban in Senate Bill 4 that requires local police to follow federal immigration laws. Things eventually settled down. Immigration always a hot topic, both sides of the aisle in the state of Texas, as it is in many places across the country. Apparently, the law goes into effect the 1st of September. So you've got about 3 months before it is enacted officially.
We'll see if things simmer down there, because apparently one of the reps is accused of saying, I'll put a bullet in your head while they were fighting. He's now come out and said, I was talking about self-defense because the other guy said he was coming after me. There's now police protection involved.
Tough talk.
It is. We'll keep an eye on it. Frightening video out of Baghdad. Watch this closely after 2 deadly terror attacks killed dozens. Days after the president called on all countries to help fight the war on terror.
We paved the way for a new era of cooperation among the nations of the world to defeat the common enemy of terrorism.
Fox News national security analyst Waleed Fares is here. He's going to explain what may have our allies backing away a bit.
Also, some breaking news on the fight to toss out Obamacare. President Trump tweeting moments ago a new message to Republican senators. So we'll tell you what he said on that in a moment. Coming up.
And the White House parting ways with its communications director. Are there more shakeups on the way? What does it mean for the administration now moving forward?
There is a shakeout. It's like a baseball team. You put someone in as shortstop, turns out he might be better at third, might be better to send down to the minor leagues, might be better off.
Right before the break, we mentioned this new tweet from the president. This could be significant. Here it is. The U.S. Senate, he writes, should switch to 51 votes immediately and get health care and tax cuts approved fast and easy. Dems would do it, no doubt. End tweet there. This has to do with getting the legislative agenda through Congress and getting it done quickly. Sean Duffy was on with us last hour. He guarantees that it'll get done, but there's a process through Capitol Hill, and
this would be historic.
That's right.
And I'm not sure that folks on either side of the aisle will be willing to go down that path.
Yeah,
it would take almost all of them.
In light of what Mitch McConnell had said over the weekend about tempering expectations on health care when it comes to a vote in the Senate, they're going to vote on it, but whether or not it gets the votes that you need to pass it is still an open question. So we'll see how this fits into our debate coming up a bit later this hour.
2 car bombs killing at least 31 people, wounding dozens more outside an ice cream shop in downtown Baghdad. ISIS is claiming responsibility for that attack. It comes after President Trump called on all countries to help crush the terrorists. Now, just days after his first overseas trip as president, allied countries are beginning to distance themselves from the U.S. Let's bring in Dr. Waleed Phares, Fox News national security and foreign policy analyst. Good to see you, Doctor.
Good to see you. Thank you.
First of all, I want to get your reaction to these 2 attacks in Baghdad. ISIS claiming responsibility at this point. It's clear that they're potentially being pushed out of other territories and back into places like Baghdad.
Well, there are 2 scenarios, Shannon. One is that the possibility of recruitment within Baghdad Sunni community, so jihadi cells would be dormant and then they would be activated. Or let's remember that ISIS has been evacuated from a large segment of Sunni areas north of Baghdad in the Sunni Triangle, and those jihadists can now travel into Baghdad. The lesson here is that the fall of any of these strongholds of ISIS, including in Mosul, does not mean automatically that ISIS cells won't be able to do this attack or future attacks, and therefore the strategy has to do with post-ISIS, what we need to do with the Iraqis and other members of the international community for post-ISIS era.
Yeah, and it's going to take coalitions. We know that. Let's talk a little bit about the president's trip. The first chunk of it in the Middle East was very well received. He got a lot of good reviews, even some praise from the New York Times. But when he ventured into Europe, the criticism really ratcheted back up again. And now that he's left, we're hearing that leaders there, France, Germany, others, say that he doesn't treat them as equals or as allies. He's sort of talking down to people and lecturing them at NATO. And they've had some pretty tough language over the last few days. What do you make about where we stand in the world now with our allies?
Well, let's be objective in how to understand this criticism. Part of the criticism that came actually from here, reflecting what was happening there, is part of the opposition. So that's very normal that any move he will do in Europe in particular will be criticized. But beyond that, let's look at the 3 countries where criticism came from. 3 of them are dealing with domestic politics, re-election in Britain, a legislative election in France, and election in Germany. And obviously, those leaders who will mention the issue with President Trump will have to use it politically. But beyond that, on the strategic level, Shannon, I think that things are going well, because what Mr. Trump has brought from the Middle East is a much wider coalition of Arabs and Muslims that the Europeans have been pressing to see alive, and it's happening now.
So I want to talk a little bit about the comments from German Chancellor Angela Merkel, because a lot was made over the last few days. And as you mentioned, she's in the middle of an election cycle, and that's always important. And you're talking to people at home. But a lot of what she said there sounds like something we've heard her say before, that Europe has to take the reins of its own destiny, that they cannot rely on others. She said they can't completely rely on others. But she did talk about but we're maintaining our strong friendship with the UK, with the U.S. But yeah, our destiny is in our hands. That doesn't sound like it's anti-Trump. It may be, there may be some nuance to it there, but those are things we've heard her say before.
Yes, indeed. I mean, there are some disagreements over the narrative with the Trump administration, over NATO in general. Things have changed. Washington has changed. But in Germany or in Britain or even in France, the actual real strategic narrative is that we will need to be together to fight against terrorism. We need to be together to find a solution for the migrants. We need to be together to address our joint economic issues. So yes, each country, each government has a political issue, and there are some disagreements, let's admit that, but those disagreements are not about the foundations of NATO, the foundations of the Western alliance.
What do you make about the handshake between the new president of France, Macron, and our president? Because it got a lot of attention on camera, and now he's talking about it, Macron, and saying it wasn't innocent.
It wasn't innocent. Again, let's put it back in the framework of the next election. The legislative election in France are going to be as important, if not more important, for President Macron, because if he doesn't get a majority, therefore he cannot rule very well in France. So he needs to make some statements like these, knowing what the international media and the Western French media have sympathies or criticism against President Trump. So it's all politics in my view.
Do you think any of these relationships need mending? Do you think they're stable the way that they are? Do you think once we get past the elections in those countries, we'll hear less of this?
I think what would mend them is basically a stabilization here of our issues, of our divisions, and what would also help, unfortunately, will be the fact that the jihadists are on in Europe, that Iran will be a problem, that the Middle East is not stable. So because of these overseas problems, Europeans and North Americans will have to come together, no doubt about that.
All right, Dr. Waleed Phares, always good to see you. Thank you.
Chairman.
So in a moment here, what the U.S. military is doing today that may eventually stop North Korea. We'll tell you about that. And we are learning the identity of the Navy SEAL who died during a Memorial Day ceremony. 27 years old during a Fleet Week demonstration over the Hudson River in New York City. That story is straight ahead.
You know, this individual came down like a rock. His parachute folded up and he just...
The Navy's released the name of the SEAL team member who died Sunday during a Fleet Week demonstration over the Hudson River. 27-year-old Remington Peters died after his parachute failed to open. His family releasing a statement calling Peters a selfless, humble, and quiet professional, known for his fierce loyalty to his friends, family, and country. The accident happened near Liberty State Park in New Jersey, overlooking Manhattan in front of thousands of spectators.
We heard a smack against the water, and then we saw a Coast Guard boat come flying at the area, and then a Jersey City police boat, and then we realized that there was someone in the water.
Peter's body was immediately recovered. He was pronounced dead at nearby Jersey City Medical Center.
Manuel Noriega, former Panamanian dictator, is dead. That death announced last night, closing a chapter in Panama's history. Doug McElwee has more on that. It was a household name after the U.S. invasion of 1989, Doug.
Yeah, it sure was. And what prompted that was one thing: Manuel Noriega's erratic and dangerous behavior. Noriega seized power back in 1983 by sheer force of his personality, promoting himself to general of the armed forces. And during his reign of power, he was the source of valuable intelligence to the U.S., but also of tremendous deceit. He routinely tipped off the U.S. to important details about Central American and Caribbean adversaries such as Cuba, but then played the other side. For example, he provided Cuban dictator Fidel Castro with thousands of Panamanian passports, charging $5,000 for each of them, allowing Cuban spies to operate as Panamanian citizens. In 1989, Noriega, who held control of the Panama Canal, became too dangerous for then-President George H.W. Bush. If Noriega's ruthless torture and murder of political opponents and his role in facilitating cocaine shipments to the U.S. didn't raise enough red flags, the murder of an American soldier, the wounding of a second, and the beating of a third in Panama forced President Bush's hands. Bush ordered 27,000 American troops to invade Panama in December of 1989. While Noriega's troops were quickly overwhelmed, 23 U.S. soldiers were killed, more than 300 wounded, before Noriega was apprehended and brought to the U.S. to serve time in prison. He was tried in France on drug money laundering charges and then extradited back to Panama. He died of complications from a brain tumor while under house arrest. In his last years, he asked to be judged by the same level of treachery as his captors, but he also asked for forgiveness.
Wow.
Bill?
Doug McElwee, thank you on that out of Washington. Shannon.
Well, the White House is pushing back hard against the onslaught of media reports targeting Jared Kushner.
Back channels like this are the regular course of business, and that's really all that we know. And I think it's very important to recognize that the president has expressed full confidence.
So is it fair to say the mainstream media is obsessed with chasing every scrap that might fit their Russia narrative? Howard Kurtz thinks so. He's here to break it down. Plus this.
It's a big problem. It's a world problem. and it will be solved. At some point, it will be solved. You can bet on that.
That comment with the Japanese Prime Minister of North Korea playing with fire, issuing a new warning that they are planning to send a, quote, gift package to the U.S. How the Pentagon is responding today. 10:30 here in New York. The White House already today blasting what they call a rush to judgment about senior White House advisor Jared Kushner and the Russia investigation. Mainstream media whipping up things into a frenzy, non-stop headlines like the ones you see on your screen here. And I know somebody's been reading that for a while now. Howard Kurtz, host of Media Buzz and a Fox News media analyst. And Howie, good morning to you on this Tuesday. You've got a piece out there now. I just want to pull the last paragraph from your story. Here it is. Whatever the media and political grudges against Kushner, that does not mean he should not be treated fairly. There's been so much saturation coverage of Jared Kushner that a casual consumer of news could get the impression that he's under investigation, and that is just not the case, end quote. Why did you write that, Howard?
Because Jared Kushner is neither a subject or a target of this FBI investigation, but he's very much a target for the media. Now, of course, the FBI wants to talk to him, given his role in the White House, given the contacts he had with the Russian ambassador, but that would just be the FBI doing its job. And I think that with the headlines and the drumbeat here, it sounds like he's under investigation. It sounds like he has done something nefarious, but based on what's been reported, it's newsworthy, but we don't know that he's done anything wrong. There's an automatic assumption here that there must be something nefarious in these contexts.
Why is this happening, Howard, and how could it be cleaned up?
Well, for one thing, he's the president's son-in-law, so that gets the media excited because now they can say the probe has reached into the White House and into the president's own family. But also, I think, Bill, that there's a lot of media resentment toward this guy who many journalists view as kind of young, rich, maybe a sense of entitlement. He doesn't talk on the record to journalists, virtually never, I should say, and I think that breeds resentment. But that doesn't matter. He needs to be covered as fairly as anybody else, and there is a sense, I mean, there's even been some commentators, Bill, who have said he needs to take a leave of absence based on what? Maybe it was naive to talk about a back channel, although other transition teams in the past have done it with Russia. But at the same time, it seems to me that we've got this cranked up to 11 without a lot of evidence 11. To back it up.
I mean, what knocks it up from the headlines?
Something else involving someone else. Well, you know what knocks it from the headlines is the shake-up stories that we all love. I know you've been reporting this morning on the departure of Communications Director Mike Dubke. Most people didn't know who he was. He'd only been there 3 months, didn't have much of a relationship with the president. But, you know, all of these stories about Sean Spicer, the fifth or sixth wave of premature obituaries on his way out. He's toast. After the trip, he's going to be out. Mm-hmm. Well, he's conducting the televised briefing today, as you know, and so I think that turned out to be a premature as well.
Come back to the story that you began with, though, because in your piece you write about how the New York Times approaches the Kushner story, how Politico approaches it. What is the distinction that you find?
Well, we've got a couple of things going on here. You have this sense of crisis. You put crisis in the headline. What's he going to do? And so there's a sense that Jared Kushner maybe has done something wrong and therefore he's a political problem when it's premature at this stage to say that. But also, Bill, you've got a number of people within the White House and the West Wing who are not fans of Jared Kushner, maybe resent the privileged position that he has, leaking anonymously, oh, he has poor political judgment, he supported firing Comey, he doesn't really want to do the nitty-gritty work of government. Of course, reporters are happy to take those unnamed potshots and turn that into a story. So that's feeding also the sense that Kushner is under siege. I just think it's a bit overheated at this point.
David Bossie, former deputy campaign manager, was on earlier today, and he was talking about the briefings that you just mentioned with Sean Spicer. Here's how he characterized it, Howie. Listen.
Mainstream media is in to destroy this presidency and to, for the first time, nullify an election. And the American people need to stand up and say enough's enough.
Oh. This is a president that clearly took on the media and likes to do it continuously. And a number of tweets from the holiday weekend referred to the fake media. He welcomes this fight. He is getting it, Howard. How do you see it?
Well, I don't agree with the president's tweet that the sources, the unnamed sources in the Washington Post story about the Kushner and Ambassador Kislyak meetings are made up. And I don't agree that the media are trying to nullify an election. But look, there's no secret during the campaign, during the transition, and in the administration, there's been an extraordinary barrage of negative stories about this president. Sometimes it's deserved, sometimes not. But to me, it's the piling on, it's the high volume, and it's the kind of getting out in front of what we know. Is it news that the FBI wants to talk to Jared Kushner? Sure. Is it a crisis that has to be resolved and maybe he can't stay in the White House? That is going way too far at this stage of the game.
Thank you, Howard. Good to have you on today. Howard Kurtz there in Washington, D.C. with analysis. Thanks.
Tension swirling as South Korea and the U.S. conduct new drills over the Korean peninsula. This comes after the latest missile launches by North Korea over the weekend. The president then tweeting this, quote, North Korea has shown great disrespect for their neighbor China by shooting off yet another ballistic missile. But China is trying hard. Lucas Tomlinson, live at the Pentagon. All right, Lucas, what can you tell us more about this American bomber flight in that region?
Well, good morning, Shannon. U.S. officials tell me B-1 bombers have been routinely flying in the region since arriving in Guam in February. Now, on Monday, not one, but two B-1 bombers launched from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, flying nearly 2,000 miles to South Korea, where they were joined by jets from Japan and South Korea, a mission intended to send a message to North Korea, following 3 ballistic missile tests in the past 3 weekends, going back to Mother's Day. The B-1 is a supersonic long-range bomber which carries the largest conventional payload of bombs in the Air Force inventory. It was designed to fly low and fast into Soviet airspace during the Cold War to drop nuclear weapons, but today the B-1 is not capable of carrying nukes. And Shannon, U.S. officials also tell me en route to South Korea, those 2 B-1 bombers were contacted over the radio by the Chinese military, but they continued on their mission.
All right, so Lucas, what is the reaction from North Korea?
Well, this morning in Geneva at a UN conference on disarmament, a UN diplomat said that recent U.S. military operations and training, including the deployment of a second carrier battle group from Japan, the USS Ronald Reagan, could one day lead to war.
The unjustifiable behavior of the United States only result in further pushing the DPRK to redouble its efforts to diversify and modernize its nuclear deterrence.
Pyongyang claims the Scud missile launched Sunday has a new precision control guidance system that can strike within 23 feet of its target. U.S. officials cannot verify this claim. North Korea has been increasing its missile tests. In 2016, it was a record-setting year for North Korea, and it's on pace to go even farther this year. Now, Shannon, the Pentagon is conducting a missile test of its own today. Jonathan Hunt is reporting from Vandenberg Air Force Base with the details later today. Shannon?
All right, Lucas Tomlinson, live for us at the Pentagon. Thank you very much.
Last hour, Jonathan was here, too, and he talked about like a bullet going into space and hitting another bullet. It's not easy stuff.
Yep, but it's critical.
That's right.
Yeah,
in a moment here, breaking news now in the fight to repeal Obamacare. President Trump says Republicans need to do something he thinks Democrats would do if they had the majority in order to get the agenda through Congress. Tell you what he's talking about. That important stuff here in a moment coming up.
Plus, tornadoes barreling through parts of North Carolina overnight. Details now on how families are struggling to pick up the pieces. Next.
It came out of nowhere and it was quick. The wind kind of picked up and the house started shaking real bad.
Several tornadoes ripping through parts of North Carolina overnight. Here's some of the damage left behind. Powerful storms knocking down trees and damaging multiple buildings and blowing over a few mobile homes. This man saw a bit of that.
It came up quick, so she just held on to the sink there in her kitchen, and she's lucky to be alive. I was across the street when it flipped over, all debris and everything actually went through my house. So I have a few holes in my walls and a lot of damage.
He's lucky. At least 14 injured in rural parts of Sampson County, which is east of Fayetteville, southeastern corner of the state of North Carolina.
Moments ago, President Trump taking to Twitter, calling out the Senate. The U.S. Senate should switch to 51 votes immediately and get health care and tax cuts approved fast and easy. Dems would do it, no doubt. Well, let's bring in our panel to discuss. From the Washington Examiner, Fox News contributor Lisa Booth and Emily Tish Sussman, campaign director at the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Good to see you both.
Hi,
Good
Shannon.
morning, Shannon. Okay, so just a couple of weeks ago when this came up, both The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said not going to happen. But Lisa, what does it say to you that if the president thinks the only way to get this done is to change the rules of the game in a way that there's bipartisan agreement, is just not going to be done?
Right, and I don't think Republicans would get on board with changing the rules of the Senate, to get rid of the filibuster in regard to legislation. But I do think that's sort of where the Senate is heading. There isn't a lot of bipartisanship anymore. We saw that with Neil Gorsuch, sort of the perfect Supreme Court nominee. And I think you only saw 3 Democrat senators get on board to confirm him. So bipartisanship is dead. But I also think the Republican Party is having trouble governing, more largely speaking, because they can get health care and tax reform done through the reconciliation process on a party line vote. And they're having a difficult time doing that with health care. So I'm not sure, even in changing the rules of the Senate, you still have the problem of getting enough moderates and getting enough conservatives on board to get it done and push it through both the House and the Senate. Yeah, getting to 51 is getting to 51. All right, Emily, exactly. The president said here Democrats would do it, no doubt. Now, we know that when we hear them talk about it now, both sides publicly say, no way, we're not going to blow up the Senate like this. But we know they've changed things. Both parties have now with regard to judges. So what is your thought? Is that a fair accusation by the president to say, listen, if Democrats were in the same position, they just ram it through?
There's no question that we're in a new era. Everything's different. And I think that it's not a big surprise here that we see that as Trump is having trouble delivering on his #1 biggest promise, which was repealing Obamacare, they can't do it through the normal rules because the substance is wrong. The better bill that the House passed still drops 23 million people, leaves them uninsured. That was the better bill, the second bill that they tried to bring up for a vote and did eventually do. So if the substance was there, if people actually wanted this, Lisa's right. Republicans absolutely have the votes right now to do it, to pass it through the Senate if they wanted it. The problem is that senators are hearing from constituents who are outraged in deep red states. They know they are really going to suffer under the repeal of Obamacare. Look, the Senate's in recess right now. Not a single Republican senator is holding a town hall because they don't want to hear from their constituents. That's really the problem. The substance is not there.
To be fair, Lisa, a lot of them have held these. I mean, we've seen them, and they have gotten really heated. They've gotten an earful. And there are people who, they're worried that they can't pay their current premiums, and having coverage is not the same thing as actually getting treatment. So there are those who, do have some hope that this new bill is going to offer something different. So we know that there's going to be plenty of disagreement about that. In the meantime, some interesting pieces this weekend on where the Democrats are going, because there's a lot being made about Republicans not being able to coalesce. But kind of who's leading the party? I mean, President Obama is still out there on the international stage. We now have Hillary Clinton back out there, also rankling feathers and speaking about things. But, there were a lot of people who thought that Senators Sanders and Warren would be leading the party. A lot of the candidates that Sanders has backed have not gotten anywhere. They've actually gotten beaten. And now we have former Vice President Joe Biden out speaking this weekend about how he thinks Democrats still aren't getting it either. He says because of the negative campaign that President Donald Trump ran, how much do we hear about that guy making $50,000 on an assembly line and the woman, his wife, making $28,000 as a hostess? They have $78,000, 2 kids living in a metropolitan area. They can hardly make it. When was the last time that you heard us talk about those people? Lisa.
Well, I would also say that that's bigger than just this past presidential election. You saw under President Obama, who lost more seats, whether it's the state legislature, House, Senate, governor seats, than any other president before him. You look at some of the latest polling from the Washington Post, and 67% of respondents feel that the Democrat Party is out of touch. So I think that the former vice president is on the money with saying that many Americans feel that the Democrat Party is out of touch. And I also think that just this sheer resistance movement might not be enough for the Democrat Party, because if you look at the House, they have to retain 194 seats, also convert 24 Republican seats. In the Senate, Democrats are running for re-election in 10 states that President Trump won. 5 he won by double digits. So I don't think the map is that favorable for the Democratic Party. So I think they need to do more than just simply this resistance movement. And you also look at the Republican senators, they outran President Trump on the ballot in 2016 as well. So I think the Democratic Party needs to do more than simply resist the president.
Really quickly, Emily, L.A. Mayor Eric Garcetti says that there's a lot of political passion out there by some of these folks, but they're insufficiently focused on doing things that will actually get voters to the polls and help them win. Your response to that critique?
There's no question that Democrats have to do things like register voters and make sure they have the correct information showing up for the polls. That's the basics all the way. But I think, if there's a question if there is a leader of the Democratic Party right now, there's not, and that's what's good about it. That Democrats are understanding they need to embrace locality. They need to have good candidates on the ballot running locally, and they need to address the issues that are local to them. There's not a one-size-fits-all, and that's actually what's great about it, that Democrats will be building from the ground up.
All right. Emily and Lisa, always good to see you.
Thank you,
both.
Shannon.
Have a great day. You too.
Got some breaking news on this story that got a lot of attention over the weekend. More on the arrest of Tiger Woods in Florida. We're getting our first look here at the police report. There's several interesting items in here. Woods was asleep at the wheel 3 o'clock in the morning, had no alcohol in his system. Officers spotted his car along a Florida road that was close to his home, I do believe. Woods was alone. He was wearing a seatbelt. The car's engine was running. Lights were on. He had apparently extremely slow and slurred speech. That is a quote. Told police he had taken several prescription medications. He was cooperative, but failed a roadside sobriety test. Breath and urine tests show no alcohol in his system. And now the arraignment for Woods is set for the 5th of July in Palm Beach County. So 3 a.m., he was near his home. And keep in mind the injuries he's had over the past several years. I think it's 4 back operations, which would explain some of the medication. But stories changing a little bit based on this police report and some of the stuff that was out there yesterday. So we're waiting for more from police in Florida on this.
And he was adamant there would be no alcohol. Looks like the test proved that. His last back surgery, April 20th. So
your memory's better.
Some of these medications sounds like they would be connected.
He makes his home in Florida, as we know, in Palm Beach County. He has what appears to be a very popular restaurant that he's opened up down there as well. But by himself at 3 a.m., police spot the car. The blinker, I believe, was on, and that's what drew their attention to him. So we're just starting to get a little more of this out of Florida right
Much more to come. And also, much more to come on Happening Now. Jenna Lee is here to give us a preview. Hello, Jenna.
Hi there, Shannon. We'll continue your coverage of the latest news, but we have a story you won't see anywhere else. 5 years ago to this day, we spoke for the first time to Staff Sergeant Travis Mills, a quadruple amputee who was at that time recovering at Walter Reed. Today, Travis is back, and what he's accomplished in the last 5 years will inspire you and motivate you and change your day. I'm not overselling this. You do not want to miss this story. 11:30 Eastern Time, Happening Now.
Well, you've sold me, and we'll see you in 11 minutes. Jenna, thank you.
Deal. Thanks. School officials, University of California, facing some backlash. This report exposing how much UC President Janet Napolitano's office spent on dinner parties at the university's expense. We've got details on that. We'll tell you what that's all about next. Everybody knows, I mean, you're a Pens fan, right? So is your husband, too.
Yes.
How about that goal that was called back from Nashville?
We don't question the referees and the officials. They have a job to do.
Debatable that it was on the line. Anyway, game 2 coming up, right?
Wednesday night.
So now the University of California under scrutiny for what critics call lavish spending on dinners. Reportedly, UC President Janet Napolitano's office reimbursed the school for more than $225,000 for dinner parties since 2012. William Lajeunesse, live on the West Coast. That's a lot of sushi, William. What's up?
Well, and it could have been used for scholarships. But, you know, Bill, if anyone else, especially the Republican, had done this, Democratic lawmakers would have had them for dinner. Instead, state officials have refused to criticize former Obama appointee and Arizona Governor Janet Napolitano, despite her getting caught with a secret $170 million slush fund, throwing those lavish parties for regents at students' expense, attempts to strong-arm an auditor, and a sex scandal at UC Berkeley that saw 19 employees, including faculty and coaches, fired or disciplined for sexual harassment. Now, the latest bombshell is that series of lavish parties thrown for the governing board, averaging about $250 per person, including expensive wine, in violation of a policy that limited regents' expenses to $81 for dinner. As for the sex scandal, well, the vice chancellor, an astronomy professor, a diving coach, a basketball coach, and a law school dean were among 19 UC Berkeley employees who were disciplined for violating the university's sexual misconduct policies. Some of those complaints were ignored for years, all under Napolitano's watch. Then, just weeks ago, auditors revealed that Napolitano kept this $170 million slush fund off the books and secret from lawmakers to pay excessive salaries and benefits to favored employees. Napolitano said she only used $38 million of it, some of it to reduce the university's carbon footprint. As for the allegation that Napolitano tried to influence the auditor, one lawmaker said it was deeply troubling. Other than that, crickets from Sacramento.
Okay, more to come, I guess, then. I'm telling you, it's a lot of sushi. William Maginus, thank you. Excellent points there from California. Thank you, Shannon.
Well, an alligator taking some liberties at a family pool in Florida. Find out how this ended. Yikes, when we come back.